All right, everybody. As you might recall, on Friday, we went over predatory lending. Yes?
Yeah.
Excellent, good. And what did we learn about title pawning, cash advance, etc.? It's a scam, but it's a legal scam. Okay, but what makes it a scam? They lie.
They don't tell you the whole truth.
They don't tell you the whole truth. Give me an example of something you were not able to find when you looked at your website. How much the interest was, etc. Okay. And so I hope, I'll ask this question, will anybody here ever use one of those companies?
No.
Okay. Hopefully not. Who said hopefully not? That's actually the right answer, because you know you shouldn't use it. But when people get desperate, you're desperate, and you don't always think well. So what we're going to do today is we're moving on to the next piece, which is, okay, if you find yourself in debt, and since we determined just about everybody in this room, not all of you, are going to college, most of you are going to start your adult life out already in debt. And the question is, how can we get out, how can we reduce our debt, and so we don't no longer owe money? Okay? Now, does that mean you're going to always be in a situation where you don't owe money? Not necessarily, but you may find yourself where you owe a little bit of debt and how you get out of it as quick as possible. So that's hopefully what's going to happen today. So you have two handouts. One is called the 7 Baby Steps, and the other is called the Snowball Debt. We're going to start with the baby steps. This is something you're going to need for not only what we're going to be doing tomorrow, but this also goes into play for when we go into investing. So if you notice, there's two on that 7 baby steps. The first 2 steps or so deal with debt. Okay? The second part to it deals with how to build wealth, how you can become a multimillionaire. And then once you become wealthy, how is it that you can, or ways you can give money back to people who are in need, which is a good thing to do. All right. So, the first thing that's on there is step 1 is to do what, Grayson?
Put $1,000 in an emergency fund.
Okay.
500,
So, step 1 is an emergency fund. And you do this no matter how much in debt you are. You need to get an emergency fund. I think you said the rule was if you were under 20K per year, you need a minimum emergency fund of how much? $500. If you're over 20K, you need a min emergency fund of
1,000.
Why do you think you need to have an emergency fund? Emergencies happen. What would be an example of an emergency happening?
Break your arm.
It could be that you broke your arm, and you do have insurance, right? But if you had to go to the emergency room, at the minimum, it's going to cost you $50, $50 for your copay visit to the emergency room. So you need at least $50. But what other and if you don't have insurance, you may be on the hook for all of it. What else? What's the kind of emergency that's probably more apt to happen in your life? Yes, sir.
If you get in a car accident.
Car accident?
A
What
baby.
else?
Your house floods.
You may have a house, you may have it flooding.
We have a
correct?
baby.
But I don't think that is necessarily one of the things that will most likely happen, although I've had water damage in my home before. Stay with cars for a moment. And think of, okay, how could your car break down?
Your brakes fail.
Brakes,
Your training.
Tire.
transmission, very expensive. Tires,
Engine.
right? Engine. Okay, I'm glad to see you're going for the big ticket items.
Yeah.
But the other ones like brakes and tires or catalytic converters, those types of things that just wear out, right? There are problems with them. So those are definitely emergencies that you will experience, and you may have already experienced them while driving your car or going out and finding a flat tire. And so you'll have to pay for that, okay? So why don't you use a credit card as your emergency fund? Excuse me?
Like, we have the same cash for when we travel home, just in case there's like a
Okay, that's a great answer. You need to have cash to travel home in case something happens. Not everybody takes credit cards. That's great. But why would you not want to use a credit card as your emergency fund? Excuse me? It puts you in more debt. A credit card is not funds. A credit card is borrowing money. So whatever you borrow, you have to pay back with interest. So it's not an emergency fund, it's in a borrowing emergency fund, and it just keeps putting you in further debt. And if you're already having debt issues, the last thing you want to do is create more. So the first thing that we do before we do anything is you create an emergency fund. That includes you. Where do you guys fall in these two categories? Under 20K, right? So you should all have an emergency fund of $500.
Does that include your bank account? Can that be like anything?
Yeah, you could have it as cash in your house. Not necessarily a good thing because you can get robbed, but yeah, in a bank. Just so you keep your emergency fund. So you should all have an emergency. Does anybody have a fund that has $500 or more in it? Okay.
I have no
You
idea.
should actually take part of that fund and put it into a savings account and use that as your emergency fund. That's the stuff that you're not touching unless there's an emergency. And then when you have the emergency and you have to use money from that, what's the first thing that you do?
Shut up.
Right. Okay, then you have to replenish. You need to replenish that fund. So if you have to get a new tire, the new tire costs you $170, and you have a $500 emergency fund, right? You need to replenish that $175 before you do anything to make sure you have your emergency. Because guess what? Life happens. As much as we don't necessarily want these bad things to happen, they do. And here's a great example. When I came home from playing tennis on Saturday, I'm walking up the stairs from my garage basement up to my kitchen, and I see there's water dripping onto this.
Flood was a good one.
It was a good example, although it didn't cost me a hell of a lot of money. But there was leakage I'm seeing going onto my stairs. So I go out, and there was a tiny pinhole leak in the water line that goes into my refrigerator to make ice. Right? It was squirting out water. So
Duct
I
tape.
shut off the water,
Big hole.
right? Luckily for me, it didn't cost me any money. I had extra tubing, so I was able to cut it and just use the same fixture and fix the problem. But emergencies happen, and I did not see that one coming. Other than,
The whole roof fell out of our basement for a brand new house.
right, that's an emergency. Exactly. So that's the first thing that you want to do is create your emergency fund. The next thing is, how is it that we get out of debt? Well, we get out of debt by using a method called the snowball method. Okay? So, how do you make a snowball?
Roll it.
You pack it to a little ball. Okay? And if you want to take said snowball,
Put ice in it.
what would you do to turn it into a
Rocks.
snowman,
Rocks.
woman, or
Roll
person?
it.
You roll it in what?
Snag.
Okay, well that's the concept that we're going to be using here for snowball debt reduction. Is you're going to look at what would be a minimum payment, finding how much more. I mean, you're going to be serious. This is, I want to get out of debt, so you have to be serious. How much more can I make on my minimum payment to help get myself out of debt? Okay. Then what you're going to do is we're going to take the debts, and I'll throw them up on the screen here for you, and I'm going to have you organize them. But we're going to organize our debts from our lowest balance to our highest balance. So what we owe the least on being first, and the most on being fifth. We're not looking at interest rates. We're looking at the lowest amount you owe. Why do you think I would have you set it up that way so the lowest was first? Yeah.
You can get rid of more. I don't know how to say it. If you only owe like a little bit on the first one, you can just
said it exactly right. That's exactly what you want to do. How many times in your life have you felt overwhelmed because you had too much stuff to do?
I feel like that right now.
Go ahead.
I feel like that right now.
You feel like that right now?
Yeah.
Well, this will also work for schoolwork too. Can work for schoolwork. Not always the best method, but sometimes you can get rid of the small tasks really quickly and get them off your plate. And that's the idea behind the snowball debt, is to, no matter what the interest rate, some people are going to tell you that the interest rate is where you should focus. Okay? I think with people who get overwhelmed, it's much easier to get rid of the lowest balance because you get a feeling of accomplishment. If you try to keep going for that high balanced one, and you're just never getting there, you're never getting there, you're never getting there, and so you're not making any progress. You feel like Sisyphus, right? Pushing that rock up the hill, right? Remember world history, Sisyphus?
I don't know about that.
Come on, who's
No.
got T. Winslow? T. Wins in the house?
I've never had 2 wins.
That's too bad. So Sisyphus is, the person's pushing the rock up the hill, and as soon as he gets to the top, rolls back down, he never quite gets to the top. And that's what happens with debt.
I quit.
You never feel like you can get out from underneath it, you're always pushing this thing up the hill. So we're gonna start with finding the lowest current balance, okay, and then organizing it to the highest current balance. It doesn't matter what the interest rates are, okay? So on your snowball debt sheet, what I would like you to do is I would like you to write down the different types of debt, but before you write them down, you're going to organize them so that the current balance, the smallest current balance is the first thing, and then the next one, next one, next
So
one.
smallest to largest.
Smallest to largest.
Okay.
All right? Go ahead.
It's still recording.